What's up, everyone? In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the methods I use for recording and producing acoustic guitar in my home studio. And we're going to talk about three main areas in this video. The first being recording techniques. So we're going to talk briefly about miking and some recording methods. The second is going to be part writing. So what are you actually playing on your guitar? We'll go in depth about layering. And the third is going to be how do we mix in our DAW for a really huge acoustic guitar layered sound that will hopefully add some depth to your productions. So let's start with number one, recording. I have my Taylor acoustic guitar here. I'm using a large diaphragm condenser mic, and you can get a lot of great results with other types of microphones, dynamic microphones, small diaphragm condenser microphones. But I thought in this video, I keep it simple and use a mic that most people will have at home, which is a large diaphragm condenser, very versatile mic. This is the ML1 from Slate Digital. This is also a virtual modeling microphone. So there's some unique things I do with this mic that I'll show you later when we get into the DAW stage, when we get into the mixing. But yeah, for this video, I'm going to use a large diaphragm condenser. I am pointed at the 15th fret of my guitar, about 6 inches away or less. I like to close mic my acoustic guitars just for a really percussive, just direct sound. And I find that this is best, especially with a large diaphragm condenser. Now, you will get a fuller sound, a little bit more bassy using a large diaphragm, especially this close. But we're going to, later on, we're going to EQ some of those things out, and I'll show you how I get pretty balanced tone out of my guitar with this miking configuration. I also like to talk about what kind of pick you're using, too, when you're recording. So I think it's really important whether you're using your fingers to strum or a pick. It's really important to think about those things in your recordings. I like to use a pretty thick guitar pick. This is a 1.14 millimeter, so it's pretty thick. It's a Dunlop Ultex. And I like thicker picks because with thinner picks, you get a lot of the pick sound when you're strumming. And I find that thicker picks, you just get more of a percussive string sound and less of a picking sound when you're recording. So that's my personal preference. But I find this to be one of the best, is using a thicker pick. So we have a large diaphragm condenser pointed at the acoustic guitar. I'm going to be picking and strumming some chords. And now that we're ready to record, let's go into our DAW. So I'm using Ableton Live to record with my Slate Digital mic into my Universal Audio Apollo Twin preamp. This is the template I usually start with. I have some guitar tracks here all ready to record into, and I did a drum loop and bass part to play with for this video. So now that we're ready to record, let's talk about what we're actually going to play. So I compose primarily for sync and TV purposes. So a lot of my acoustic guitar recordings are to really beef up the background of my productions. And by layering acoustic guitar tracks like I'll show in this video, I can really get a huge sound. And when I mix it, I can almost get it sound like one guitar. And it really fills up the right place in my mix without muddying my mix too much. So what I usually try to do is record at least 3 layers of different material. And the first layer is going to be open chords, usually in first position. So for this video, this chord progression I'm going to record is going to be C, G, A minor, G. So 4-1-2-1 progression. And for this first part, I'm playing open chords, first position. They're suspended chords, so not a whole lot of movement between chords, just for a nice layered, consistent sound, which you'll hear when everything's together. So let's record this first part. And we're going to double track each part. And I'll show you more in the mixing stage why we do the double tracking. Let's get ready to record this first layer. Here we go. Cool, so that's gonna be our first layer. And we're gonna double track that, so I'll just record on the same track. Nice. So now if I use Ableton's take lanes, we have those two takes there. I'll use the first one here. I'll just drag the second one to this other track like that. So we have those first two takes of the first layer. Nice. So now we're going to go to the second part. Second part, I'll usually play the same chord progression, but I'll play it in a different spot on the guitar neck, usually higher up. And so we're in the key of G. I play first position, so I'm going to go to capo. I use a capo to kind of put my guitar into a different key. So I'm going to do capo on the 7th fret. And now we're going to play basically in C. And we're going to play our progression here. Now I try to keep all of the parts pretty similar so you get kind of a one guitar sound, but sometimes you can, change it up between parts. So actually for this part, I'm going to do add a little. So we'll add that to kind of give it a little extra flair, but usually I try to keep the parts pretty consistent and then also keep in mind to play the same strum pattern so you can really get a consistent sound between all the parts. So let's do that second part now. Cool, so that's the first track, the first take. Let's do that again on the same track. Cool, so now we should have two parts there. We'll take first one, move the other take to the second track. So now we have two parts, each double tracked. And we'll talk about the panning and leveling when we get to the mixing stage, but this is what we got so far. So as you can see for now, it's pretty consistent between all these parts. There's not a whole lot going on that's jumping out in the mix here. It's kind of sounding like just one big full acoustic guitar part, one big sound. That's kind of the goal with this layering process. So let's do our third part. And for the third layer, usually what I'll do is I'll do some kind of drone open string layer. And so we're in the key of G. So usually I'll try to put the guitar where I can play an E, so I can really utilize the open string. So for here, that would be capo on the 3rd fret. So now my G chord is in an E major shape. And I'll do some kind of drone thing like that on the top 3 or 4 strings, really utilizing the open strings to get like a really open sound to add on this layer. So sometimes I'll just play one note. Then you just hit the one chord. But for this, I'll play along with the chord progression and we'll see how this turns out. So here's our part 3, our drone layer. Cool. So let's record that again. And let's see our take lanes. We got first take the second take there. So now we have 3 different parts, 2 takes of each part, all stacked. Right now they're pan leveled a little bit, but we'll get into the panning leveling in a minute when we get to our mixing stage. So let's just take a listen to all 3 of these parts so far. Sounds pretty good. So again, just really consistent through all of those parts. Just allows it to, when they're all layered and mixed down, just kind of gives it some glue. So it really just sounds like one big layered sound, which is what we're going for here. So for the mixing stage, and also depending on what section of your track you're working on, these layers, like I said, they can change a little bit. Like sometimes if I'm just working on the verse, I'll have layers be different parts, so they'll kind of stick out. But when you have all the layers with the same strumming pattern, the same chords, same rhythm, you're going to get a kind of one consistent sound. And then when you start to change each part, that's when things will stick out. So if you want your guitar parts to stick out, change the parts. But just keep in mind, like for at least this, there's going to be, 10 other tracks and instruments layered on here. Another instrument might carry the melody. So for this, I really just want it to kind of sit buried in the mix. But if you want your guitar parts to stick out in a certain part, verse, the bridge, in a different part of the song, you can kind of mix up what you're playing here, mix up the rhythm, mix up where you're playing the chords, and that will allow each part to stick out. But just keep in mind, it's going to take up more space in your mix, the more diverse you get with your parts. So just be mindful of that. So with the mixing stage, let's look at what we have going on each of these tracks. So I have the Slate Digital mic, which is a virtual modeling mic. So I use the Slate Digital plugin here. I have it modeling a Telefunken 251, which I found is the best mic model for acoustic instruments. I have some light EQs, boost in the high mids, some cutting in the mids and low mids, and of course a high pass to get rid of some of the lows and boominess of the guitar. And I just have a really light optical compression going on here. Nothing too crazy. I'll usually compress as a group, or each part, each left and right part, I might add another compressor on, like group them up and add another compressor, or I'll just compress the whole thing as a group depending on how diverse the parts are. For this, I'll probably just add one more compressor on the bus and then we'll be good. So some light compression. So let's just see what this is doing. Yeah, so just really light compression. Let's just listen to it's so one part soloed, and we'll put it in the middle. That's with the Slate Digital without. So really just thinning out the lows, adding a little bit of compression, and that's it. That's going on. I have that same thing across all of these tracks, and then I'll usually go in and just adjust the compression if needed, depending on how dynamic each part is. But for this, it looks like all of them are about the same dynamics and volume. So I'll just leave the compressor as is, and again, probably compress as a group. So as far as volume and panning. So here's all 3 of our parts. So usually what I'll do, I'll definitely pan each part a separate direction. And I really did a lot here with this particular production by double tracking every part. Sometimes I might just double track one part, and then the second and third part can be panned. And if you do that, again, that's going to take up a little bit more space in your mix because you're really going to hear those two parts that are panned. They're really going to stick out. But for this one, just double tracking everything just kind of lets it sit in the mix and panning it. So usually I'll pan one part like a quarter of the way left and right. So that's this one. Our main chords is just panned 25 left and right. And then I'll pan the second part a little wider. So I have this pan 40 left and right. And then the drone, I'll pan wide, pan hard left and right. And you can change these too depending on what you want to stick out. So whatever you pan hardest left and right is going to stick out. It's not going to stick out as much as what you're panning more towards the center. So I have kind of the main chords really accentuated here. And then these auxiliary parts are just kind of complementing them. And you can see that too with the volumes. I have this part the highest in volume, and then this one's a little bit lower, and the third part is even lower. So let's just listen to that one more time and see if it needs any more balancing. Cool, so that sounds pretty good. It really is just sounding like one really full layered guitar part, which is what I'm going for specifically in this song. So the last thing that I'll do with this is usually add some light room or plate reverb, and again, maybe compress the group. So here's my template is automatically routed into these sends that are kind of groups, and this kind of helps me out for bouncing stems later on. So here's my acoustic guitar group. And on that mix bus right there, that acoustic guitar bus, I have just a light compressor. Just a 2A style compressor doing some very light, just leveling. And the dynamic EQ is not doing anything right now, but sometimes if the lows are building up, and this depends on the parts, like where you're playing on the guitar neck and what parts you're playing. Sometimes the low end will really build up, and I'll do a dynamic EQ to kind of balance out the low end where there's some parts that the low end is building up. But for here, there's not really much low end building up. We kind of took care of it already in the EQing. So don't really need that. And then just some really light room reverb here with Valhalla Verb. So you can hear that tail. It's a really short tail. Just give it some depth and some room. Yeah, and that's it. So that's usually all I'll do with these kind of acoustic guitar parts. Again, that's 3 layers. Each layer is very similar, but also has its own kind of characteristic and what it's adding to the part. And that is how I layer my acoustic guitar in my productions. Hopefully you guys got something from this, and hopefully you can use this in some of your own songs. If you have any more questions about this process, or you have a technique or a process that you really want to share with me, please put that in the comments. And again, subscribe to the video, and I'll see you guys next time.